but I wanted us to have a meeting. There's a couple of things on the agenda. Can everybody hear me, by the way?
Yes.
Great. That are pretty important to just have a discussion, I think, before the informal meeting. And so let's see, can anybody help me out with, is there anything I officially need to do to start this meeting right now?
Let's call to order.
Oh.
Yeah, just call for order.
Okay, I'm calling this meeting to order. Thank you. So our agenda, we have like 4 things on the agenda, and then we'll have time for public comment and new business. The first thing I wanted to bring up is how is the city going to go about creating a protocol or a structure for developers who want to approach the city for a pilot, because we just went through this lengthy process, which was not very clear for the city or for the developer. And it seems to me like it's going to be an important, or it would just be a really beneficial effort to create a clear process and create clear requirements, definitions, you know, I don't know if demands is the right word, but just a statement of what the city requires when it is approached by a developer. So, so I wanted to bring that up for discussion. And I guess I should, even before I start talking about that, I should apologize for the confusion about our scheduled meeting time. I didn't realize that I was supposed to pass along the Zoom link to the city clerk, and so it wasn't made public in time. And so I apologize about that. And Shersha, you're
Yes.
the other person here. Do you have any thoughts about the development process, or rather the pilot proposal process, and how we might, you know, make it work better for the city?
Well, continue starts about the like, you know, do more housing, and I know about the pilot program, if it is all the way coming and it's helpful for city and the citizens, will do that way. I mean, that's my view. So and we need housing, that's we all know. And when we need housing, but we have to do the housing for people who really need housing and they can afford it. That's my thing.
Right. Yep. And so that's what I mean. And when a developer approaches the city for a pilot, they are, you know, proposing to fill the need of the city, and in return, they want to have the city's support in a variety of ways that are well established. And so, and you know, because as you'll see later, I mean, later on, I'd like to bring up the question of whether it's appropriate for the city to announce that we are actually having a housing affordability crisis or emergency, you know, because there are situations occurring because of COVID and because of, well, really because of COVID, or triggered or exacerbated. I guess it's conditions that have already existed, but that are just exaggerated by COVID that are happening right now. And I'm sure we're all hearing about, you know, and seeing housing prices going really, you know, super through the roof. And so, so because of that, there's going to be future, you know, more development that we're going to be approached about. And so, so I'm bringing this up now just so that we can, basically so that it's not the first time anybody hears about it when we talk about things at the informal meeting. So, you know what I'm going to do is I'm just going to run through my agenda as the temporary chair, and I'm going to make sure, I'm going to see whether Tom might be on the way. Sorry, everybody. So, okay, so that was the first thing on my agenda. Also of interest and importance to the Housing Committee for tonight or for a future conversation is the establishment of a local program administrator relationship, which is something that has been discussed in the Anti-Displacement Learning Network program, and which essentially is something that lots of municipalities and counties have, which is a relationship with a nonprofit housing organization, which basically provides support for things like first-time home ownership or low-income home ownership. So support that's available to basically just help people who haven't had access to home ownership to gain access to that. Another, I mean, this is just another one of the things that, you know, is pretty available, and the city, and is kind of in a way a easy, it's like a low-hanging fruit situation in terms of trying to ameliorate our housing crisis, and which will, you know, I mean, the home price problem is going to be spreading throughout the county. So, so the county too will need to probably establish a relationship like this. And if Hudson can act as sort of a leader in this, I think it could be really useful. So that's something else. Shersha, do you have any thoughts on that? Or does anybody, I mean, I guess it's fine to open this to the public for questions.
Rebecca, this is Jane. I've had my hand raised, but maybe,
Oh,
no, that's okay. I'm gonna unraise my hand. If you're opening it up, may I ask some questions then?
Sure.
I'll lower my hand. Just to go back to your opening remarks, when you're talking about the city developing sort of a protocol for developers to adhere to when they are looking to partner with the city, have you given thought to things like size of the project? I mean, what if it's a small one? What if it's a big one? And then what comes first? I know one of the big discussions surrounding the process we've just gone through was that perhaps the developer in that case should have gotten the approval, or at least sought conversation with the planning board before, or concurrent to coming to the council. So I'm just wondering if you have given any thought to sort of what, or is that the purpose of what we're discussing, of what those steps might be? I mean, which comes, you know, is it a chicken or the egg?
Of the kind of thing, oops, I'm getting the feedback, that that, we could put in place as a process is, yeah, if this development is, the footprint is over a certain size, that it goes through the planning board first. Something, I mean, that's
the kind of, okay, so that's the kind of thing that we're,
although, I mean, and really, I'm just also talking about the general shape of the process, like maybe time requirements, like, lead time requirements, or what kinds of, specifically what kinds of information do we want to have all together before we're going to even begin considering a pilot, things like that. But I think, but that also, I mean, what you're suggesting seems like a great idea. And so really what I'm trying to do is get a conversation started about how should we do this? Like, how should the city best go about creating the process? I don't know that it's best actually that the Common Council be where this process resides, or whether, there are agencies in the city that might be actually more suited to be in charge or to develop a process. There's the IDA, for example, which pilot proposals too, and maybe has more more like institutional memory or longevity than Common Council terms. That could be one idea. So
I don't want to debate this point, but we often discuss the need for the housing. Is there should we start with requiring developers to speak to that, to speak to the need that they're seeking to fill, and that's a sort of a moving target, of course, as many things are subject to change, but it's, it's tricky, but, and I'm not debating the need, I'm just debating I'm not even debating, I'm trying to understand the scope of the need at any given point, not now, perhaps sometime in the future, but in this future time when a developer would come to the city, it would seem to me that the developer would be saying, as of this date, we see that there is a need and we would like to fill that need with thus and so.
well,
And
I think, we have the housing needs assessment, right? And we have the strategic housing action plan, which does define levels of need.
which are rapidly aging. I mean,
Yep.
it's a concern that they were done 2017, thereabouts. And so now, they're excellent documents, absolutely. And they're thorough and, everything. But it worries, it is of concern that it's not something we can point to forever and say, well, when we did this plan, we needed X. Maybe we need X plus, maybe, I obviously don't know. But when do we require the developers to update that information, or we update that information so we're working in sort of real time?
Right. I mean, I guess what you're asking is, what are
the for discussion?
What? Well, what are the more immediate ways to ascertain like exactly what our housing needs are? And I mean, that's definitely, worth asking. And it seems like, a housing study, a housing needs assessment is a, big project. It takes a long time. One thing that we don't have is a lot of time to produce affordability for the city. So if we're talking about, finding more immediate measures, like DSS is an agency in the city that, deals with the issues of housing affordability. I mean, doing maybe a survey of how many families are seeking apartments, what size families, what are their income
Right.
affordability levels. So some kind and certainly there are agencies, there's Catholic Charities, there's Columbia Opportunity, there's I think it's called St. Catherine's is another agency. Again, DSS. I mean, they're constantly receiving like the need. So
Right.
that would be a good way to kind of produce a snapshot, as it were, of what we're looking for.
Yeah, that's the kind of thing I'm talking about. And then obviously, those lists, well, maybe not obviously, but it seems to me that those lists would need to be deduplicated is the word I'm searching for. So it wasn't a composite number, but it's to get a sense of, because just to get a sense of in the interest of accuracy. Anyway, we don't have to delve into this. I'm just saying that establishing that as a sort of a baseline for a developer would be a place to start, is my suggestion, and not getting into the weeds of how that's done. But in real time, because it does concern me that these other broader studies will age out. And as you say, a snapshot of more current information, I think would be important going forward.
Sure. Yep. So Tom, we're just discussing,
I'm late.
that's okay.
I was actually talking with the developer.
Were you?
Yeah, it was a meeting I set up a long time ago. And I mean, it's not about something for us, just to ask general questions about how these things proceed and financing, and a couple of interesting insights. But
That's great. I mean, what we were just discussing is how can the city develop a process for developers to approach the city for a pilot? How can we establish clear parameters and a process? So that's a great first step, or sixth step or something would be to ask the developer.
one thing I discovered in this conversation is that while low AMI projects definitely need pilots, he insists that you could do mid-level AMI projects with no pilot. It's really not. I mean, if their finances are, in order and everything, they don't need a pilot. So that was somewhat insightful, because we do need that level as well.
I mean, that was my understanding, is that Crosswinds was denied a pilot, was built anyway, but that it does have the issue that, I mean, obviously there are many families who can't qualify for its particular income level because they make just over a certain amount or something like that. So, it's like they don't make market rent income, but they also don't make, they somehow don't qualify. So, which speaks to Jane's point that like an actual assessment of, with information from the various agencies that deal with how you can actually place people in subsidized housing in this city would be, something that we need. So,
well, another thing I've been working on for the BEA is this list. This is the 80 or so properties that the city of Hudson owns. Now, obviously not all of them are developable. There's only actually maybe 3 or 4, but we do have developable properties. And more, I mean, we're also looking at it because this might be the year of the great sell-off. Not like because there's a booming real estate market in general, but you'd be surprised at some of the buildings we have that, like, why are we still hanging on to these buildings? Just to give an example, the building up at the water treatment plant is a very nice house, and it's just sitting there rotting away.
So, and is there, I mean, it seems to me that we would want to put our needs together and develop a package. I mean, what we're doing with having the affordable housing development timeline consultant person is try to bring all of these things together so that we shouldn't go selling properties off willy-nilly, but rather
Oh, no, I'm not talking about selling developable properties off willy-nilly. This is just like a house, one family house. This is not, this is to make up our budget gap. That's
Okay.
clearly in the future. Yeah, this property wouldn't be developable. A couple things like that, but then of course there are these lots. I mean, that lot on Washington between 6th and 7th, across from the front of the firehouse, is 2.4 acres. Now, if you looked at the Galvin project,
Sorry, the
that
lot,
lot wasn't even a full acre. So we're talking about a pretty big lot that could do really, and it's, I think that's definitely something that should be in play.
it's on Washington between 6th and 7th across from, oh, you mean what they use sometimes as runoff parking?
Correct.
Aha. Fabulous.
I mean, go look at it. It's a big piece of property.
Oh, yeah, parked on.
Yeah. And there wouldn't be, even if you did a larger building, there wouldn't be the parking problems that would have, no matter what happened with the Galvin project, I have a feeling it would have been stymied anyway by parking. I mean, you can't just put a 77 unit building somewhere and say, find your parking somehow. I mean, that would have been up to the planning board, and I think they would have, pressed that issue pretty
Right.
firmly. But anyway,
Yeah. So, okay,
that's
so,
right. We need the idea of that whole consultant is to have a bigger plan for what the few developable lots we have.
right,
The two obvious ones being that, what I just mentioned, and North, 4th and State.
right. And so, cool. That's great. I mean, and I guess maybe for the next housing committee meeting, do you want to present like some ideas for development that we can move forward with, or how do you want to do that? How are we going to do that?
Well, I think with city properties, I mean, you're on HHA, so I mean, they seem to me someone or a group that has a better sense of things and more willing to work cooperatively with the city in developing properties,
Yeah.
HHA.
Absolutely.
So, I mean, I think that's what we should be thinking about.
Okay.
And they, and then it's the same process. They have to go out and find the financing and do all that work, and but at least it'll be done with a procedure that I think will make people they'll be transparent, it'll be open, and they will do something that I think a private developer or even a nonprofit private developer is less willing to do, and that is their finances would be completely open.
Mhm.
Because the problem with a lot of these developers is that they don't want to show you their finances, for all kinds of reasons. Some of them proprietary, but I think HHA wouldn't have that problem at all. And we would be able to, they already have a pilot at Bliss. And I guess the point is you really, pilots, as we've discovered from this process and others, are so controversial. The public has a hard time appreciating them or understanding why they're needed or if they're needed.
Well, yeah.
So
I mean,
we
so-
really want to do it. We really want to do it with full disclosure of everything.
Right. Cool. Well, I think that sounds really great, and I would love for us to talk with the HHA board.
Of which you are one. So
which
you
I am
be talking to yourself.
You are talking about it right now, in fact. So yeah. Okay. So the point that we were on was really how do we develop a process for pilot proposals? Do you have anything to say to that?
Well, yeah, I think you can also look at some of those models that Mike Tucker showed you for, how pilots are, scheduled and all that. I mean, that's a beginning point. It wouldn't be the same model because those were pilots for commercial developments.
Mhm.
But maybe Mike could help us with that in some fashion,
I bet he could. Cool.
All
right. Yeah.
Tom, can we just go back to you made a very enticing comment, and that was about what are pilots actually necessary at all?
Yeah.
So if maybe that's a interesting starting point, that the developer demonstrates why the pilot is so critical, because I don't imagine that, that the resistance towards pilots in general is going to, abate anytime soon.
Right.
And if it is possible, as you suggest from your conversation, that one can build an AMI range, mid AMI range, and I'm guessing that that's the 40 to 60 or 60 to 80.
Yeah. It was,
40 to
this
60.
guy was we're talking 50, but yeah, so 40.
Yeah, okay. So 60, average 60.
Yeah,
And that's actually seems like that's kind of going to be the sort of sweet spot in the development anyway. That maybe the first order of business is to demonstrate conclusively why a pilot is necessary.
Yeah. Yep.
And
That does involve transparency about their financing and their own
but
profit margin, I guess, is what I'm looking for.
yeah, but Tom, were you? Sorry, I don't know that you mentioned this. My understanding is you were speaking to a private developer, not a public.
Yes, correct.
So
But even, see, the thing is, he was pointing out that the whole thing about the financial part with the private developers, basically, they are trying to hide their profits. They don't want you to see how much they're going to make. You know what I mean? But of course, you should be able to see that. Especially if someone's asking a pilot. I mean, you gotta see, and that's what was very confusing. I mean, we shouldn't harp on the Galvin thing. But that was very confusing about what was.
The model, the hotel development that's currently being considered at the IDA, because they are asking for a large pilot. And one of the first questions that I asked was, can you tell us how much profit you're planning to make off of this? And I was told at the time, I believe that, we would have to go into executive session, and that it would be a special kind of request. And then,
Right.
So I haven't remade the request, I don't believe.
But it's essential, because that's where, I mean, look, they're all gonna want to make a profit. Well, let me rephrase that. Ostensibly a non-profit, you wonder why they'd have to make a profit on, a considerable profit on something like this. But in terms of the Union Street project, they're obviously going to make a project, a profit, I mean. And so it's just, and who knows how to judge what's a decent profit, an objectionable profit. I mean, and when,
Situation, because I'm just there in the meeting saying like, well, do you really need a pilot? I mean, I've said that. I've said that right out. And the developer said, absolutely.
I think there's definitely a difference with a commercial project like that could easily tank. Whereas like a housing project right now in Hudson, it would fill up in a week. I'm sure everybody's heard about the housing market here, rental and everything is beyond belief. It's just no one can find rentals at any level, even the higher end.
So to go back to the pilot thing for a second, because my understanding is, and obviously Rebecca, you're much more knowledgeable about this than anybody on this call, but it was my understanding from early pre-COVID conversations that the pilot that they were seeking was for 10 years, and similarly to the WIC, a declining balance. So not only was it relatively short, but it reduced in value until the end of the 10-year period. And the 10-year period started right when they put the shovel in the ground. So there'd be 2 years of building and breaking, and then they would open, and hopefully, over probably the next year, they'd be in the black. But then 3 years into their pilot, they're paying less and less, or they're getting less and less value, if you will, from the pilot until the thing winds out altogether at 10 years. Right. I don't know if that's still the plan, but taking that model and applying it to housing is perhaps something else that could be explored. So it isn't an all or nothing pilot, and it doesn't go for decades. That asking, and I don't know if this is possible, but asking housing developers to just sharpen their wits a bit. And when they're talking about pilots, talking about how certainly it helps them, but it also can be, is a tool to get a project off the ground, but isn't like lining their pockets forever. Not that happens.
What affordable housing developers talk about is that the profit margin is, or the margins, they don't even talk about profit. They say the margins are very slim. That is the, across the board. And that, and that in order to guarantee maintained affordability, that's what the pilot is there for.
Yeah, again, we're not going to rehash. Did not seem, from the information we saw before, that did not seem to be so much the case. But anyway, new world.
Yeah. So,
process.
Well, thank you for this robust discussion of pilots. Tom, I brought up the local program administrator relationship, which I'm just going to really quickly say is something that I am hoping to talk about in the HCDPA meeting, that's where we could.
Person.
What?
Could house the person. So
House the person. Well, it's not a person, it's a relationship with a housing. I'm talking about the local programs administrator.
Oh yeah, right. Okay,
Yep.
gotcha.
So it's to provide people in the community with support for home ownership, pursuit of home ownership, and other kinds of housing related things. And the benefit of having a relationship with some, instead of trying to establish one for ourselves, which would be, and even if that could happen with this new job in the city, it doesn't have to. It would be a lot simpler to attach ourselves to a housing organization that already knows how to do this.
And this is something RUPCO has said they would be interested in, right?
RUPCO is one of the approved state LPAs. So yes, we've talked about that with RUPCO. So
Cool.
move forward with that.
Is there a financial commitment? I mean, how big a financial?
There is a financial commitment. It's a contract for services, basically. So, and it's not like a salary. It's not at the level of a salary. So,
Well, HCDPA does have money, so I mean,
they do.
they can do it,
We do.
and they have properties.
That's right. So, okay, third on the agenda is the Housing Trust Fund Supportive Resolution, which I sent to you all. And so this is a resolution. Should I share my screen with this?
Yes.
Will do.
I have it somewhere here myself.
Hold on a minute. This could be embarrassing for a minute, but hopefully not. Can you see my resolution?
Yep.
Yeah.
All right. So this is a resolution in support of the establishment of a housing trust fund. So this resolution is not actually establishing the trust fund, to express support for the general premise of it and for the reasons for it, and to acknowledge the benefits of it to the city. So should I like read it out loud for people who haven't seen it, or just scroll slowly?
Well, we'll put it on the agenda for next Tuesday, so everybody will be able to see it then.
Okay.
I can't see it now. I mean, it's
Cool. Protocols.
yeah, not reading it. Do what you want. It's your meeting.
Well, I think it's pretty compelling.
It is.
It talks about, AMI of the city of Hudson as opposed to the county is, as of 2017, is 36,641. Households earning less than 80% of the AMI are considered low income, blah, blah, blah. Housing trust funds can provide municipalities with resources targeted to serve very low income and extremely low income households earning no more than 50% of AMI. Hudson has 651 households which meet these criteria. So that's a very substantial portion of our city that we can help with this.
Right, and more than is covered by what we have available,
So,
right, in terms of subsidized housing.
Yeah,
so is it 651 households? When is that? When was that number?
This
Is that
is
from
all-
2017?
yep, it's 2017. So, which, you know, I mean, I know it seems like forever ago, but it's not really.
Okay, and are those 715 individual, unique, if you will, households, as they say in data world, or you know, all of them combined, like from every list?
Unique.
Unique. Okay, that's the word I was looking.
Yep. So it just expresses the commitment of the city to providing adequate affordable housing as set forth in this SHAP. And it also talks about the Anti-Displacement Learning Network grant, a portion of which could be used to seed this fund. And that's, you know, an important feature of the resolution.
So where does this, so who administers the fund?
Right. I guess that, so in our grant application, we are creating a role in city government, I guess is the right way to say it, or of a housing justice manager, which is
Oh, there it is, I see.
housing justice manager. That housing justice manager is the role that we have also called housing coordinator.
Mhm.
And will include the management of the housing trust fund.
So what kind of money, you said there's a portion of the grant existing that would seed this. Is that a lot of money or just?
I don't actually have the number in my mind of how much we've set aside, and we haven't finalized our grant application, but it's a substantial amount of money.
Oh, good. So,
Yeah,
and this is basically to get council support to go forward with it all.
right.
Great.
Do
Love it.
you, Rebecca, do you talk here about how else it would be funded? If it was seed money, where would the other funding come from?
This resolution doesn't contain that information, but I will be providing that. I mean, we have talked about it in various different meetings about the different ways that they are funded. And Eileen and me and Calvin and maybe that was it from the council attended a
Yeah.
meeting last week that went over some of the, but I will provide like just a document, which I actually did send to the housing committee a couple of months back, of different ways that it's funded. It has to do with things like the mortgage recording fee.
Yeah. Okay, that's what you're talking about here. Okay.
Yep. Mhm. There are other usual means. I mean, I would imagine that a portion of the lodging tax would make sense to go into this housing trust fund. And that's not just my imagination, I don't think. So, so do I have, what do I need to do right now with like?
I mean, we could do a motion to go forward with it, but I'll definitely put it on Tuesday's agenda. I mean,
Okay.
it's worth pointing out, there's this notion that everything has to be forwarded from a committee, but it really doesn't. I can put anything on or, you know.
I get that. It isn't bad to have, you know.
No, it definitely helps. I agree.
Okay. Then.
I make a motion that we put forth this resolution to the council this month.
I second that motion. Hello.
Now ask for all in favor.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right, Trisha, I wonder if you were really there.
Go ahead, President.
Okay, thank you. All right. Oops, I stopped screen sharing. Okay, so let's see. The last thing that I wanted to discuss is the possibility of the city declaring a housing affordability emergency. because of what you, Tom, were just discussing, that, you know, there's like I mean, we're in a health emergency, which is creating a actual unprecedented, you know, rush of people fleeing New York City and potentially other cities. And there's a really serious situation happening with real estate values escalating beyond what, you know, I mean, I don't know what metric could be used to measure like whether there's an emergency or not. And it's interesting that I think that question came up a while back. Eileen, I think, brought it up when we were talking about the vacancy study.
Mhm.
Like, how can you tell if there's an emergency? And I mean, you know, there probably is some way to tell whether there's an emergency when it comes to the cost of attaining shelter in a city, like the average cost versus the average income level of a resident of the city, something like that. I don't know. Does anyone have any thoughts on that?
Well, what is it you're proposing? I don't quite get it.
Well, I'm proposing that we declare a housing affordability emergency that would then allow us to basically act with more exigency to work against that emergency.
It seems to me you have to have a plan or at least some ideas on how you would address this emergency, that it isn't enough to say there's an emergency without kind of talking about how you're going to mediate the circumstances that are a result of the emergency, or that what the response is going to be. So, you know, to use COVID as the example, there were a million ways of responding to that emergency, and they were evolving certainly, but
No, definitely. I mean, that's my subtext would be that indeed, like developing more affordable housing would be the response to the emergency situation that's being created, and which of course is a long strategy, right? So and couldn't be the only, but I mean, what you're saying is exactly what I needed to hear, because I'm not a strategist. So yeah, right. So if we were going to pursue declaring a housing affordability emergency, some short-term measures that we would take in addition to acting, I mean, part of what I have in mind is that, you know, we talk, I mean, there are many things that get talked about repeatedly, like, but I mean, Tom, you've just brought up this property that I didn't even know the city owned, but like, could we, you know, create an immediate plan for development, whatever that entails, like pursuing development?
Rebecca, can I just pop in and say, if it happened tomorrow, that there could be a designated piece of land like that 2.26 acres, and it happened the day after tomorrow that, you know, Repco, whoever came in and said, we'll put it together. I can't envision that anything to respond to this could happen in less than 24 months. And that's if it went through with no glitches, everything went lickety boom. It just, the sheer response would be 24, maybe 36 months from, you know, from a dead start where we are now. Mm-hmm. So I love this idea, but it makes me want to say, if there is an emergency being the word, then what are the thoughts about responding to it with more immediacy? Mm-hmm. Because not I mean, if everything is an emergency, then nothing is an emergency, you know?
No, definitely. But yes,
So that's, sorry, I imagine my frustration is bleeding out here, but
No, you're so calm. What are you talking about?
Really?
No, no, everything you're saying makes perfect sense and is totally on point. And so I guess what I'm proposing is we need to come up with a plan, an emergency plan,
aha,
some emergency measures. I have a t-shirt that says this. I need to formulate a strategy because it's you know, it's something that needs to be done.
Yeah, I just,
Like, so I mean, like with the anti-displacement funds, we have a strategy that we're developing, which I will share. And I mean, it's again, this is an application we're making, but
Right.
So it has to do with providing gap funding for people who do go to DSS, go to Catholic Charities, the people who are looking for housing and are not going to be able to get into whatever subsidized housing is available. We're talking about finding ways to provide just like a gap amount that could actually unlock the amounts that are available already through those agencies. So that's an example of an emergency measure that we have in our plan. But so I guess in addition, I want to find out what is the city capable of doing.
well, I know what's on the immediate horizon, of course, as I mentioned last week or whenever, are the 25 units at Bliss.
Mhm.
I mean, that could respond pretty directly to the crisis. Beyond that, I mean, as Jane pointed out, I mean, you can't build anything in response to, that's going to solve anything in an immediate sense.
That's true.
Right.
Although I would just say you
Right.
can, though,
Right.
on a more accelerated or like expedited, that's the word I've been looking for, expedited schedule, you can get those processes going. Because
Sure.
otherwise, I mean, certainly it's not going to be immediate but if you don't start faster, you don't get it done faster.
Right.
So that's one thing I want to just, but yeah, so
No, I agree. Of course, there's Tiffany's plan where we could just move people in. Never mind.
anyway, all right. So I guess
Rebecca, I'm sorry, I have to withdraw, and it's not just because of Tom's humor. It's I'm going to be hitting leave meeting, and I just wanted to know it wasn't out of anything other than a schedule crunch.
Well, it's been great having you here, Jane. You did have something that you wanted to bring up. Would you like to, I mean, I can jump to that.
Oh, okay. So food for thought, in the food for thought category. And this was triggered actually by somebody, well, a shared constituent of Rebecca and mine, who has reminded me that the city has on its books a vacancy rule law that addresses properties that are vacant, and that if they don't have a building permit and if they're not for sale, and there are a couple of other qualifications, that the owners are to be,
You pay a fee.
Pardon
We
me?
already have that, right?
They
I
pay a
know
fee.
we have it, but I'm not, okay, so here's the point. Okay, let me get to the point. I don't think it's being enforced to the full extent of the law.
Okay. I mean, Craig has a list, I believe, of 10 buildings.
Yeah, I think, and I'm not faulting him
All right.
particularly, I'm just bringing it to the house. This is sort of blends into finance because we're looking for ways of increasing revenue. So if we're really looking at all avenues to expand housing, I think it's incumbent upon this committee perhaps to lean on all agencies to get housing out there in the public domain. Not that they're necessarily going to be affordable, you know, in the ranges that have been identified, but at least they're in the marketplace. And if we're just kind of allowing owners to sit on these things, we're not being vigilant about pursuing the law that's on the books, then, you know, we need.
No, I agree. And there's the one most obvious to me is the corner of Warren, the eastern corner of Warren and Fourth that's sat there forever and could provide a lot of apartments, the whole complex there. And it's a question of how we can pressure that owner to do something with this property.
Oh, you mean that empty lot?
No, no, no. I mean, Warren and Fourth on the eastern corner, northeastern corner, beautiful building, and it extends up
right,
the,
right.
you know, it's disgraceful that that's sitting there doing nothing for all these years.
So I think one of some of the reasoning behind this law is to put a little financial pressure on owners, to kind of just make it less, you know, advantageous to have it sit there, have these units sit there, because all they had to do is pay the taxes and, you know, they were left alone. So to just, we have the law in the books. It's a matter of enforcement, I believe. And I know that, well, in January, before things fell apart, when I talked to Craig about this, he was in the process of getting the letters out. So I don't know if this would more appropriately come from the housing committee that has more heft than Jane Trombley has, but
No, it's worth asking Craig.
no. Okay, thank you, Rebecca.
Can we, like,
Who's that, Dewan?
Duan, yeah, can we add that, like, if anybody don't pay the fee, fine, I mean, then we could add to tax, or no, it's not possible?
Well, no, but you can increase the fine can accumulate.
Yeah, the fine increases.
Yeah,
No,
there's
increases after certain time, you know, it's accumulate a lot of money.
Yeah.
And if
Yeah.
they ignored it, so can we add to the tax?
Oh,
Property
add to their property tax bill. Yeah, I think that can be done. I don't know if that's in the law as it's written, but certainly.
yeah,
And by the way, I shared with Zoe Palantonio, who's handling all the sort of code enforcement issues and everything, an interesting publication by the ABA called Vacant Properties, Vacant and Problem Properties. And there are other methods out there for forcing owners to develop their properties. I mean, they're difficult and they involve litigation, but some of them might be worth pursuing, you know?
I would absolutely be in favor of that. I think, on the other hand, we may have some low-hanging fruit in terms of revenue for these fees that could be collected that, you know, we haven't been as vigilant about as we could be.
That does, do we have to have a motion to pursue that something or other? Because that seems to be like a very good idea. I had no idea that those fees weren't being collected. And I recall when the law was passed or the ordinance or whatever it is. And, you know, it's kind of surprising that we haven't been pursuing it. And so.
I can just ask Craig what's happening with it, and also ask Heather, has it actually brought in any revenue?
I've looked at it in the fee schedules, and I haven't seen it itemized as such, but that doesn't.
Yeah, I haven't seen it either. I agree with you. I didn't see anything indicating that it was there, but it might be under another category, or who knows, you know?
Okay.
So-
Happy Labor Day weekend, everyone.
And
You
to you,
too.
have a great vacation.
Yeah, over and out.
So is there anyone else in the public who would like to speak? John?
I did have a couple of questions, and actually, I will say that I did speak to Craig Haig today about the vacant units in Hudson, just because I'm doing stuff for the census right now, and it seemed a lot easier than continually knocking on doors. There are 40 vacant buildings on that list. I don't know how many units that.
40 vacant buildings?
40?
Yeah.
That's it. That was his latest count of ones that fall under the
There are 40 vacant units, and if somebody wants to foil that, I'm sorry, I had a printout of the list earlier.
No,
so
no, what I mean is those all fall under
The vacancy,
vacancy as described in the vacancy law.
yes.
Okay,
Yeah, because if they're for sale, they're not on the vacancy.
right. No, that's what I was trying to,
Are
Yeah,
you
if they have a building permit.
John, are you talking about what Jane was just talking about?
Yes.
yes.
You're talking about properties. You're saying there are 40 vacant properties?
Not
building.
apartment or house.
I'm not, I imagine that also means properties. If it doesn't mean properties, the number is pretty close.
Okay,
Because there might be accessory buildings on a property.
It's a lot of property.
that's a
That's
lot of,
yeah, and some of those, I mean, I just rattled off one to my boss so that he could check the list, and he said, oh yeah, there's 3 units on that property. So there's a lot of them can be multifamily.
well, so the other question, like, I believe that Jane was distinguishing between just a property being vacant and then one that's habitable but vacant. Are you also distinguishing between those two things?
We don't distinguish between those things.
Okay, because I think that there's some difference there in terms of the fee.
Right, I mean, there's one 2 doors down from me that's burned out. Right, that's obviously different than, because it's just not habitable. I don't know, that would be a good question for Craig. I didn't care that much
Well-
because it just means that I don't have to count people in that building.
Right. The other cross check would be to see which ones are potentially on the forfeiture, the foreclosure list. 'Cause some of the-
There were 2 on the foreclosure
Okay.
list, that I saw today. I really just glanced at it because I was sort of passing it along.
Okay, I'll ask Craig for that list.
When I did speak to Craig, he said, we do rely on people in the public to tell us about these properties because he can't just go out and start inspecting. As the law is written, someone has to start the process by telling code enforcement, hey, there's this vacant building that should be paying vacancy fees. I imagine once people see the mill rate next year, they're going to start ratting each other out left and right. But for right now, that's how it comes in. And I don't know that there have been that many coming in.
So does anybody know what is the process after, so if,
It gets a few months. Like the first thing they get is a warning and a few months to come off. You can look at the vacancy law and
Yeah, it's in the
I mean,
code.
that thing went through a lot of drafts.
Good
So pulling it from memory is probably inaccurate. Carol's here. She could probably tell us. But that might even be straining her memory. I do have a couple of questions. Has anyone spoken to other municipalities in the area about successful affordable housing pilots that they've had, not just to the developers, but to the municipalities, to see how they might have approached some of these affordable housing projects?
Well, that's what the Benjamin Institute study did.
No, that was to talk about whether or not this pilot was appropriate, but has anyone spoken to other municipalities about protocols that they have
Oh, protocols.
no,
No,
but
for
that
instituting?
would be a no-brainer to do that. And
right.
yeah,
Yeah. I don't know what municipalities, I mean, because I'm assuming you want some sort of equivalence, and we are a very small
well,
city. There
that's
aren't that
always
many.
going to be the problem with Hudson. Well, and I suppose, I mean, in the learning network thing, like that's an obvious place for me to go. And I've asked many people, sorry, somebody's doing some buzz sawing outside my house.
Fine.
Yeah, I'll look into that. But indeed, Hudson, the size of Hudson as a municipality with sizable African-American low-income community.
Well, also just that we're a small community. If you want to build a 200-unit project in Manhattan, it doesn't affect the tax base very much. There's 8 million people, right? Or not, I'm sorry, in Manhattan, there's not. But if you want to do that in Hudson, where there's only 6,000 people, the tax base is considerably affected by adding that many more people, right? Who
But it's
are,
not necessarily adding people,
Depends.
right? It's housing people who
of
may,
course,
yeah.
but it does affect the tax base because everyone's paying for the same services.
It might, unless you have counterbalancing development, which we do right now. So
Well, that's true. On that note, as the Galvan project was going through, I have been, because I'm interested in accessory dwelling housing anyway. I've been doing some reading and research on accessory dwelling units as
Can you
means
say
of
close to your
building affordable
microphone?
housing. I'm sorry, I've been researching accessory dwelling units as a means of building affordable housing. And I got through some, and then I decided I wanted to do some more research. So I don't have anything written for you yet. But accessory dwelling units built along the alleys as a way to democratize development throughout the city seem to provide a really good opportunity for us to get some affordable housing into the city very quickly, right? Because you can scatter that affordable housing throughout the city. You can provide, and I mean, I spoke to somebody in Dee Dee's office about this to see if the state even has a program like this. But by extending sort of a 10-year tax abatement on the accessory dwelling structure to homeowners and allowing them to leverage really low interest rates right now and the higher equity that they have because everybody's property is being assessed and homes in the area are being sold at such high rates, someone could build a $200,000 accessory dwelling unit right now off of the home equity that they have at a low interest rate. In return, you say, well, this can't be a short-term rental, and you have to rent out at a certain percentage of AMI for 10 years. And you created some affordable housing that
Yeah,
is workforce housing. I mean, we're talking about housing for single young people, or maybe a couple with a small child. This is not for a family of 5, but you could do that throughout the city. And at the end of the day, for 10 years, if you do that, you're not really affecting the city budget. But after 10 years, you are increasing property values throughout the city. You're allowing homeowners to remain in their homes if property taxes are becoming a problem because they have an income stream. And you're allowing more people to live in the city. You're creating density. You're beautifying the alleys. There will be displacement. The skunks are going to have to move. But I mean, there are a lot of potential benefits to approaching affordable housing in a sort of democratic way, rather than just counting on a pilot from a developer.
Well, actually, Rebecca has explored this 3 years ago and sent me an interesting article about, remember that, Rebecca, about it was some West Coast municipality was doing exactly that. And
I mean, we've talked about this a couple of different
it
times.
actually requires banks to be involved because it's the banks that have to give you the lower interest rates. Remember?
Yeah, banks have to be involved in any large development.
Well, so there's one developer that actually Randall Martin just sent me a link to. I'm sorry, can you guys hear me over this?
Yeah, it's fine.
Yeah, you're fine.
I just feel like I can move. Randall Martin just sent me a link to a little news item he came across of a developer in California who is, this is their entire business is they have a kind of house that they build in your yard for you, and it's specifically priced out for all of the budget lines to match up with the affordability. So I mean, I think it's an interesting idea. I know that the outcry about the alleys will be or would be substantial because people have feelings about the alleys.
That's fair. When I moved to Hudson, the alleys were one of the reasons that I thought that they were rustic and charming, but they can be vibrant in a new way. There's a lot of dilapidated.
Jonathan Lerner has written extensively about this as well in a number of articles. And the problem that arose last time we discussed it was zoning issues, because there's all these bulk rules that would have to be amended or changed. And then, of course, the perennial obstacle of our fire concern that seems to manage to dominate many discussions here in Hudson.
I actually want to place fire hydrants at the entrances to the alleys, which if you have to replace some of the sidewalks anyway.
No, that's not really the issue. The issue is more about these trucks getting through and what's going on with cars and all that.
Right. And if you were creating garages underneath these apartments, you'd be getting some of the cars out of the alley.
Yeah,
Yeah,
no,
we have that.
it's plausible. I don't think it in any way would mitigate the need for low-end affordable housing needing a pilot, but it would certainly increase the housing market. I mean, housing availability, apartment availability.
John, do you have any,
I'd be happy to do it myself.
Yeah. I'm
You know
sorry. I'd be happy to live. I'd be happy to live. I don't need a lot of space. My dog needs about 200 square feet to lie down, but
do
I'm sorry, Rebecca, what was your question?
you have any specific leads on information, you know, or, I mean, would you like to pursue this as
I mean,
a,
I was halfway through researching it. If you want to give me until this time next month, I can have some better information. There are a lot of questions
Mhm.
that I have about how these things are financed and how they work in other municipalities, what kind of changes you have to make to the zoning code.
Another thing you might look at, John, in this regard is HCDPA in particular has a lot of small lots that could easily, if the zoning was changed, do small houses.
Yes.
Yeah, actually, John, you should come to the next HCDPA meeting and we can talk about this there. It's on maybe Tuesday.
Tuesday.
I think it's in the morning. It's like 10:30.
Funny, I will tell all of you that the census is like super behind right now. So I don't know if I can make it to that one because I don't know if they have enough people. And there's a lot of places on Hudson that haven't been counted yet. Do me a favor, let all your neighbors know they should, if they see a little notice on their door, they need to fill it out. I will try and come to that. I did have another question for you, Rebecca, and that is involving the HHA meetings, which are not taking place on Zoom. They are taking place, they are not open to the public on Zoom.
Ooh.
They take place on YouTube. As you
Oh.
guys are talking about developing new stuff and as Bliss Towers residents should be able to come to these meetings and discuss their concerns, as should members of the community, it would be great if those HHA meetings could be opened up.
Are you sure they're not on Zoom? Because that's how I
Sure.
access them.
You access them on Zoom because you are a participant and a member of the HHA board. They are not open to members of the public on Zoom.
Huh.
You can only be viewed on YouTube.
But you can watch it on YouTube.
Yes, but you can't participate or ask questions.
Huh.
These are
Well,
public meetings.
we haven't, I'm trying to think whether we missed a meeting. I think we missed a meeting in August. Like we had vacation.
I mean, in the beginning of the pandemic, I think that this
Just to be technical about it, John, to be technical about it, they don't have to have public comment, but I mean, of course, we always want public comment.
Right,
But-
that's not the best way,
Correct.
even if it's barely acceptable.
Right.
And I think that the rest of the city, for the most part, the DRI side has done a really good job of opening up meetings to Zoom. I think HHA should too.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I'll definitely bring that up with the chair of HHA. Yep.
Yeah, just have to post it. I mean, there's no reason for not posting it somewhere,
No,
the Zoom contact, which is what we do with all the council meetings.
right.
Okay, anything else?
I do have one question about Crosswinds. Does anybody remember if that project looked substantially different before it requested a pilot and got rejected? Did they scale back their project? Did they change the construction or the percentage of AMI?
I can
that
find
they-
out. I can find out.
I believe they, well, what, this is hearsay, so never mind, I won't even say it.
I mean, that would be very interesting to know.
For sure. Yep, the developer I've heard is somebody who, you know, is a very reputable developer that works all around the state. And
I mean, they seem very, I mean, you know, they're a little more suburban than, but I think that they're very nice. They're really nice units and it seems like a nice little community.
Mhm.
That was for all my questions.
Okay,
Make a motion to adjourn.
I'll second that motion.
Saoirse?
Yes.
All in favor of,
Aye.
Aye.
thanks. Meeting is adjourned.
Bye.
Have a nice weekend.
You too, thank you.
Bye-bye.